No one in Maplewood believed that one small decision on a cool October evening could quietly change the direction of 3 lives, but that was exactly what happened the night Emily Harper crossed the street with nothing more than good intentions in her heart. Maplewood was a peaceful town just outside Boston, the kind of place where people waved from porches and raked leaves into neat piles, where marriages looked stable from the outside and secrets stayed behind closed doors. Emily, 36, worked as a school counselor at the local middle school, and she spent her days helping children untangle emotions they did not yet understand. She was patient, calm, and known for her steady smile. At home, her life looked just as steady. She had been married to Daniel Harper for 8 years. Daniel worked in finance and traveled often, flying to New York or Chicago for meetings, returning with polite hugs and tired eyes. They did not fight. They did not shout. They simply lived side by side like two careful roommates who respected each other's space. Their conversations were short and practical: bills, schedules, groceries. At night, Daniel scrolled through emails while Emily read novels she barely followed. She sometimes wondered when the warmth between them had faded, but she always pushed the thought away, telling herself this was what long marriages looked like. Across the street lived Ryan Collins and his wife, Laura. They had moved in 6 months earlier, a friendly couple in their late 30s who seemed happy enough. Laura had bright energy and often chatted with neighbors, while Ryan was quieter, offering small smiles and short greetings. Emily had noticed them in passing but never thought much about them until she began to see small changes. Laura's car was gone more often. The porch lights across the street stayed on late. Ryan's shoulders seemed heavier, his posture more tired each time she saw him collecting the mail. One evening, as the sky turned pink and gold and a cold wind pushed leaves along the sidewalk, Emily stepped outside to carry in grocery bags. That was when she saw Ryan in his backyard, struggling with a broken fence panel that had fallen after a recent storm. He was trying to lift it alone, frustration clear in the tight set of his jaw. For a moment, Emily hesitated. It was not her problem. She could simply walk back inside, cook dinner, and wait for Daniel to call from his hotel room. But something in Ryan's expression, quiet defeat mixed with exhaustion, pulled at her. Without giving herself time to think, she crossed the street and leaned lightly against the open gate. "Need a hand?" she asked, her voice warm but casual. Ryan looked up, surprised, then gave a small, grateful nod. "Yeah, actually. That would help." They worked side by side, lifting the heavy wood and steadying the posts. The task required focus, and for a few minutes they spoke only about practical things: tools, nails, the weather. The air smelled like fresh pine and cold earth. When the fence was finally secured, Ryan stepped back and let out a slow breath. "Thanks," he said, brushing dirt from his hands. "I'd been meaning to fix that for weeks." Emily smiled. "Storms don't wait for good timing." He gave a quiet laugh, but it faded quickly. There was a pause, thick and uncertain, and Emily sensed there was more behind his tired eyes. She almost walked away then, almost returned to the safe routine of her own quiet house, but instead she asked gently, "Is everything okay?" The question hung between them. Ryan stared at the ground for a moment before answering. "Laura moved out last month," he said finally. "We're separated." The words were calm, but they carried weight. Emily felt a small ache in her chest, a natural human response to someone else's pain. "I'm sorry," she said, and she meant it. He shrugged, trying to appear strong. "These things happen." But his voice betrayed him. As they stood there under the fading light, he explained that the distance between him and Laura had grown slowly, like a crack in glass spreading over time. Long work hours, missed conversations, feelings left unspoken. One day they simply realized they were living parallel lives. Emily listened carefully, the way she did at school, giving him space without judgment. She told herself she was only being kind, only offering neighborly support. When she said, "If you ever need anything, company, advice, even just coffee, I'm around," she believed it was harmless. Ryan looked at her then with open gratitude. "That means more than you know," he replied. For a second, something shifted in the air, subtle but real. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. Two people acknowledging loneliness without naming it. Emily felt it and quickly stepped back, offering a polite smile before heading home. Inside, her house felt unusually quiet. Daniel had texted that his flight was delayed and he would not be back until Friday. Emily set the groceries on the kitchen counter and stood still, replaying the conversation in her mind. She told herself she had done a good thing. Helping someone in pain was who she was. Yet as she washed her hands and looked out the window, she saw Ryan's porch light flicker on across the street, a single warm glow in the growing dark, and she felt an unexpected pull in her chest. It surprised her, unsettled her. She turned away quickly, almost annoyed at herself. This was nothing. A neighbor helping a neighbor. That night, lying in bed alone, she stared at the ceiling and listened to the hum of the heater. Her phone remained silent. Daniel did not call. The memory of Ryan's tired smile returned to her again and again, and she wondered how long he had been carrying his pain alone. She also wondered, quietly and guiltily, why his vulnerability had stirred something inside her that she had not felt in years. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the repaired fence panel. Across the street, Ryan stood by his window, looking out at the same dark sky. Neither of them knew that this simple moment, this small offer of help, had opened a door neither had planned to walk through, and in the quiet of that autumn night, as Maplewood slept peacefully, something fragile and dangerous had begun to grow. It started with a simple text on a gray Tuesday afternoon when Emily was finishing paperwork at her desk at the middle school. Her phone buzzed, and she saw Ryan's name light up the screen, a small surprise that made her pause before opening the message. Which was short and careful. "Hey, do you know any good therapists in town?" She could have replied with a name and left it there, but instead she typed back, "I know a few. If you want, we can talk first and figure out what might help." She told herself it was professional, harmless, aligned with who she was, and when he thanked her and suggested coffee near the Charles River, she agreed before she could overthink it. The cafe was quiet, warm, filled with the smell of roasted beans and soft music, and when Ryan walked in wearing a navy jacket and that same tired expression, she felt the now familiar pull of concern mixed with something she refused to name. They sat by the window overlooking the water, and once he started talking, the words came quickly, how the house felt empty, how silence echoed louder than arguments, how he kept replaying old conversations with Laura wondering where things had shifted. Emily listened the way she always did, nodding, asking gentle questions, guiding him to see patterns, but this time it felt more personal because his pain was not theoretical. It was right there across from her, raw and honest. He admitted he felt like he had failed, like he had missed signs he should have seen, and when he looked at her and said, "I don't think I was enough," something inside her tightened because she knew that feeling too well, though for different reasons. She offered thoughtful reassurance, explaining that relationships are built by two people and that distance rarely belongs to one heart alone, and as she spoke, she realized she was also describing her own marriage without meaning to. When the coffee cups emptied, neither of them stood up right away. Instead, they lingered in comfortable silence, and Ryan finally said, "You're easy to talk to," his voice steady but warm. She gave a small smile and answered lightly, "It's my job," but he shook his head and replied, "No, it's you." The compliment landed softly but deeply, and for a brief second she felt seen in a way she had not felt at home in a long time. After that day, the messages became more frequent, simple check-ins, small jokes, updates about therapy options, and each exchange felt innocent on the surface yet meaningful underneath. They met again the following week, this time for a walk along the river trail where fallen leaves crunched beneath their shoes and cold air painted their cheeks pink. Ryan spoke about practical matters, lawyers, paperwork, dividing belongings, but then he surprised her by asking about her life, her job, her dreams, questions Daniel had not asked in years. She answered carefully at first, then more openly, sharing how she sometimes felt invisible in her own home, how routine had replaced romance, how she missed laughter at dinner. Ryan listened with focused attention, not interrupting, not judging, and when she finished, he said softly, "You deserve more than just routine." The sentence echoed in her mind long after they parted ways. At home, Daniel was packing for another trip, discussing flight times and hotel confirmations, barely noticing the thoughtful look on her face. She almost told him about the walks, about the coffee, but the moment slipped away as easily as it had come. Days turned into a pattern, work, messages from Ryan, quiet evenings, Daniel's absences. One Friday, Ryan invited her to a small bookstore event downtown, insisting it was public, casual, nothing complicated. She hesitated, aware of the invisible line she was approaching, yet she agreed, telling herself it was community, not secrecy. The bookstore glowed with soft lights, and they stood close in the crowded aisle, occasionally brushing shoulders, each accidental touch sending a spark neither acknowledged. Afterward, they shared dinner at a nearby restaurant, choosing a corner table where conversation flowed easily. Ryan laughed more that night than she had ever seen, and Emily realized she was laughing too, freely, without effort. When he thanked her again for being there during a difficult time, she responded, "Friends help each other," but the word friends felt smaller than what was growing between them. Outside under the streetlights, the air felt charged, and he hesitated before saying goodbye, his hand hovering near hers as if asking permission without words. She did not pull away when their fingers briefly intertwined, and that simple contact felt louder than any confession. Later, lying in bed beside Daniel, who was scrolling through financial reports, she stared at the ceiling and replayed the evening, both warmed and unsettled by it. She knew no physical boundary had been crossed, yet emotionally something significant had shifted. Ryan's messages grew more personal, sharing memories from his past, fears about the future, and hopes he had nearly given up on, and Emily found herself waiting for those messages, checking her phone during meetings, smiling at the screen before catching herself. One afternoon, as snow threatened in the sky, he texted, "I don't know how I would have handled this without you," and she stared at the words longer than she should have because they carried weight. She was no longer just offering guidance, she was becoming essential to his healing. That realization both thrilled and frightened her. When Daniel surprised her by coming home early one evening with flowers, saying he wanted to reconnect, she felt a sudden rush of guilt that nearly stole her breath. She thanked him warmly, meaning it, yet part of her mind drifted to the message Ryan had sent that morning. The contrast between the two men sharpened in her thoughts, Daniel stable but distant, Ryan vulnerable but attentive, and she understood she was standing on fragile ground. Still, when Ryan asked if they could meet again because he had received difficult news about his divorce process, she agreed without hesitation, convincing herself that compassion was not betrayal. As she put on her coat and stepped outside to meet him under the pale winter sky, she sensed that what began as kindness had evolved into something far more complicated, and though no promises had been spoken, their connection was no longer just about support. It was about two lonely hearts finding comfort in each other, walking steadily toward a line that would soon demand a choice neither of them was fully prepared to make. By November the air in Maplewood turned sharp and cold, and the space between Emily and Ryan grew warmer and more dangerous, though neither of them said it out loud. What began as support had slowly become the best part of their days. and Emily felt the shift every time her phone buzzed with his name, every time she caught herself choosing outfits more carefully before meeting him for a walk or coffee, every time she compared his attentive eyes to Daniel's distracted ones. Daniel noticed changes first, small but clear: Emily humming in the kitchen, smiling at her screen, stepping outside to take calls she once would have answered beside him. He asked gently one evening, "Is something different?" and she forced a calm smile, replying, "Just work stress," hating how easily the lie slipped out. Across the street, Ryan's house felt less heavy now. He had started jogging again, cleaning the yard, even repainting his front door. And when neighbors commented on his improved mood, he simply shrugged. But the truth was simple: Emily had become his anchor. They met often, always in public, always telling themselves it was harmless. They shared long talks about regrets, dreams, and the kind of love that feels alive instead of routine. One cold evening, Ryan texted asking if he could come by because he had received official papers confirming his divorce was moving forward, and Daniel happened to be out of town again, stuck in Chicago due to a cancelled flight. Emily stared at the message for a full minute before typing, "Okay, come over." When Ryan stepped into her living room, snow clung to his coat, and his eyes held both sadness and relief. They sat on the couch, closer than usual, the quiet hum of the heater filling the room. He spoke about finality, about signing documents that once felt impossible, about how strange it was to watch a chapter close so completely. Emily listened, her heart aching for him, and when his voice cracked slightly, she reached for his hand without thinking. The contact felt natural now, familiar, and neither pulled away. "I thought I'd feel free," he admitted softly, "but I just feel lost." She squeezed his hand and said, "You're not lost. You're just between versions of your life." He looked at her in a way that made her breath slow, studying her face as if searching for permission. "What would I do without you?" he asked. The question was simple but heavy. She should have created distance right then, should have reminded him that she was married, that this support had limits, yet instead she whispered, "You'd find your way." He shook his head gently. "You're more than help to me." Silence settled, thick and charged, and the room felt smaller. Their knees brushed, their hands still linked, and Emily felt the full weight of what was happening, not physical betrayal, but emotional crossing. When he leaned forward and rested his forehead lightly against hers, it was not dramatic, not rushed, just quiet and intimate, and in that moment the line they had pretended not to see disappeared completely. She closed her eyes for a second, aware that this closeness belonged to someone else, aware that Daniel trusted her completely, yet she did not move away. Nothing explicit happened, no. Promises were spoken, but something sacred shifted. They were no longer two neighbors navigating loneliness, they were two hearts entangled. When Ryan finally stepped back, his voice low, he asked, "Emily, what are we doing?" The honesty in his tone startled her. She had been avoiding that question for weeks. "I don't know," she admitted, and it was the truest thing she had said all night. He ran a hand through his hair, looking both hopeful and afraid. "I care about you," he said, not demanding, not dramatic, simply stating a fact. Her heart raced because she cared too, and that was the problem. After he left, the house felt too quiet, and the guilt arrived fast and sharp. She walked into her bedroom and saw Daniel's framed photo on the dresser from their trip to Maine years ago, both of them laughing in bright summer sun, and she felt tears rise because she realized she had not protected that laughter. The next evening Daniel returned home unexpectedly early with flowers, saying he wanted to surprise her, and when he kissed her cheek she felt the contrast deeply, his familiar touch, steady and loyal, compared to the electric awareness she felt with Ryan. During dinner Daniel tried to make conversation about future plans, suggesting a weekend getaway to reconnect, and she nodded while her thoughts tangled in confusion. She hated herself for comparing them, hated that she felt pulled in two directions, one built on history and vows, the other on attention and rediscovered emotion. Over the following days Ryan's messages carried a new tone, more direct, less guarded. He thanked her not just for listening but for making him feel alive again, and every word strengthened the bond while increasing her inner conflict. At work she found it harder to focus, replaying his confession in her mind, wondering how something that felt so gentle could be so wrong. One afternoon Daniel reached for her hand across the kitchen table, a rare gesture, and she realized how far she had drifted without physically leaving. Emotional infidelity had crept in quietly, without dramatic scenes, without clear warnings. That night she lay awake staring at the dark ceiling, understanding that choices were forming whether she admitted it or not. Ryan had crossed a line with his words, but she had crossed it first in her heart. The question was no longer whether something was happening, it was whether she would stop it before it reshaped everything. And as snow began to fall outside, covering Maplewood in soft white silence, Emily understood that the calm surface of her life was about to break, because once feelings are spoken aloud, they demand an answer, and she was running out of time to decide who she wanted to be. Winter settled heavily over Maplewood, covering streets and rooftops in quiet white, and with it came the moment Emily had been avoiding for weeks. The emotional space between her and Ryan could no longer stay undefined, and she felt it the second he knocked on her door one crisp evening, his expression steady but determined, no longer confused like before. Daniel was home upstairs finishing a work call, unaware that the decision about his marriage was standing just outside. Emily stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind her, the cold air sharp against her skin, and Ryan wasted no time pretending this was another friendly visit. "I can't keep doing this halfway," he said gently, his breath visible in the freezing air. "I care about you, Emily. Not just as a friend. I want more." The words were calm, not dramatic, but they carried weight that pressed against her chest. For a moment she could not speak because she had known this was coming. Every shared look, every late-night message, every quiet touch had led here. He was no longer asking for support. He was asking for a future. "You make me feel chosen," he continued. "And I want to choose you fully." Snow crunched softly under their shoes as silence stretched between them, and Emily realized that this was no longer about excitement or comfort. It was about consequences. She thought of Daniel upstairs, of 8 years of shared holidays, inside jokes, long drives, and promises spoken under summer lights. Their marriage had grown distant, yes, but it had not been cruel or broken beyond repair, it had simply faded through neglect. She also thought of Ryan, of the way he listened, the way he noticed small details, the way he made her feel seen after years of invisibility. Both truths lived inside her at once, pulling her in opposite directions. "If I walk away from my marriage," she said slowly, "it has to be because it's truly over, not because I'm escaping something." Ryan's jaw tightened slightly, not in anger but in fear. "Isn't it already over if you're unhappy?" he asked. That question cut deeper than he knew. She had asked herself the same thing many nights. But she understood something now that she had not before. Unhappiness was not always the end, sometimes it was a signal to repair what had been ignored. "I haven't tried," she admitted. "Not really. I let things drift. I stopped fighting for us." Her voice trembled because this was the first time she had said it out loud. Ryan looked at her carefully, reading the shift in her tone. "So what are you saying?" he asked quietly. Tears filled her eyes, not because she did not care for him, but because she did. "I'm saying I can't build something new while something old is still unfinished," she replied. The honesty hurt both of them. Ryan exhaled slowly, nodding as if he had prepared for this answer even while hoping for another. "If you choose him," he said, "I need to step away. I can't stand in the middle anymore." She understood. He was not asking her to sneak around. He was asking for clarity. And clarity demanded courage. That night, after Ryan walked back across the snow-covered street, Emily went upstairs and asked Daniel if they could talk. He saw the seriousness in her face and closed his laptop without hesitation. They sat at the kitchen table where they had once planned vacations and laughed over takeout dinners. Her hand shook slightly as she began. She did not describe every detail, did not confess every emotional moment, but she told the truth about the distance, about feeling unseen, about allowing another connection to grow because she had felt lonely. Daniel's face changed slowly, not with anger but with hurt. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked softly. The pain in his voice was harder to bear than shouting would have been. "Because I was afraid you'd think I was ungrateful," she answered. "Or that it meant we had failed." Silence filled the room, thick but honest. Daniel admitted he had buried himself in work, assuming stability was enough to keep love alive. He had not noticed how quiet she had become. They spoke for hours, not as roommates but as two people finally facing truth. It was uncomfortable, raw, and necessary. For the first time in years, they looked directly at each other's fears instead of avoiding them. When Daniel said, "I don't want to lose you," it did not sound like obligation, it sounded like effort. In that moment Emily realized she had a choice not just between two men, but between running from discomfort or rebuilding through it. The next day she met Ryan beneath bare trees in the small park near the river where so many of their walks had taken place. The sky was pale and cold, matching the quiet sadness in his eyes. She did not delay the words. "I'm choosing to try to fix my marriage," she said gently. He absorbed the sentence without interruption. Pain flickered across his face, but so did respect. "I figured," he admitted. "You don't seem like someone who leaves without trying." She stepped closer, not in romance but in gratitude. "You helped me see what was missing," she told him. "Not just from my life, but from myself." He nodded slowly. "I don't regret caring about you," he said. "It reminded me I can still feel deeply." They stood there. For a final moment, not touching this time, both understanding that their connection had been real but not meant to be permanent. As spring approached, Ryan accepted a job opportunity in Chicago, ready to start fresh without shadows of unfinished feelings. Emily watched from her window the day the moving truck arrived, her heart heavy but clear. She and Daniel began counseling together, not because everything was magically fixed, but because they were finally willing to work. It was slow. It required patience. Some days were awkward, some hopeful. But effort replaced silence. On a mild April evening, Daniel reached for her hand during a walk and she squeezed back, not out of habit, but with intention. She had learned that attention is powerful, that loneliness can blur judgment, and that emotional lines are just as serious as physical ones. Most of all, she learned that love is not only about passion, it is about choosing, again and again, even when it would be easier not to. And though a part of her would always remember the winter when her heart almost changed direction, she moved forward knowing that clarity, even when painful, had given her something stronger than excitement, it had given her truth.